Pascal was like the first real programming language that I used. Before that, I had BASIC and assembly language. In some ways, these weren't real languages. That's not entirely fair, but the move to Pascal was a huge leap in the right direction. The changes were unimaginable, and I spent a lot of time trying to imagine it. I knew there was something better out there. In TI Extended Basic, we had while and wind as these magic reserved words. They were in the manual only to the extent that it said, "Don't use these words." I was young and impressionable, and I knew there was some serious magic being held just out of my reach. Those magic words made more sense when I finally learned Pascal. For starters, I've been mispronouncing it. It's not wind, but W-end. W-end is short for end of while. I feel like I've lost something. My version of learning the truth about Santa was learning what W-end, this completely unused and unusable word, actually means. But it's okay. Pascal really was everything I'd imagined, plus a few things I never would have thought of in a million years. I have a vague memory of reading a book on Pascal in our middle school computer lab. This was before the internet and before I could drive, so my options were limited. Whatever I could have gotten my hands on would have made my day. I don't think I actually touched a real Pascal compiler until high school. Sorry I can't get the details right. Just imagine a very happy child. I found another clue to this great mysterious thing I'd been chasing. Mysteries were fun when I was a child. This is the cover of a vintage manual for Apple Pascal from 1980, courtesy of the Internet Archive. I'll put this link in the description below. This must have been the book from middle school. I took a class in high school for computers. We studied Pascal in that class. I already knew Pascal back then. I had taught myself from 2 books. I still keep them on my bookshelf. One is titled Advanced Turbo Pascal, Programming and Techniques. The other is titled Using Turbo Pascal, covers version 3.0. I think that class is where I met Chris. He was a year older than me, and he was really into computers and programming. He was doing a programming project for someone for money, and he wanted my help. I think that was near the start of sophomore year of high school. I got paid for writing a program in Pascal. You always remember your first. And I deserved every penny. I taught Chris the open squiggly bracket, $, capital I, close squiggly bracket trick that allowed us to share code. This was decades before GitHub. Somehow I still remember that arcane incantation. Open squiggly bracket, $, capital I, close squiggly bracket, off the top of my head. It had that feeling of power. I knew some powerful tricks would allow me and my friend to write code together. What is Pascal, anyway? Now I'd say it's a language based on the idea of simplicity. Less is more. Pascal took away features found in other languages, and they put limits on other features. That's what I think is really cool now. That's what the world needs more of now. But how did I see Pascal at the time? It was organized. Using block scope and functions and procedures, we could break a big problem down into smaller problems. And we could keep doing it until the problems got small enough to solve. That seemed like a novel idea at the time. And it was real. For one thing, it was compiled. That means it's fast and efficient. That also means it was hard for anyone to reverse engineer the final product. It was really real. I was using the legendary Turbo Pascal. It was a product people paid money for. They kept the good ideas of Pascal, and they added just enough features to make it actually useful. You could write directly to memory and other hardware. You could talk to the operating system. You could handle I/O errors. You got a real string type. And when Turbo Pascal didn't know how to do something, it gave you the low-level access to do it yourself. Basic chose to share some stuff with us. Turbo Pascal gave us everything. I had access to professional tools. For a long time, I was impressed by a certain rhythm of Pascal. I can't do the voice right for this. It should be, if you want to read it yourself, just imagine a very calm voice explaining every step as it goes along. Poetry or song, I'm going to show you instead. Just imagine this is what was going on in my head. So here we see a lot of code, and you might want to know things about it. Here you see a sequence of things, and, well, the last one is going to tell me it's a string. And we got it from this other thing, which is a more complicated type, a CSS style declaration. And there's even a pointer to the online help. This is the sort of thing that was going on in my head as I typed. Each time I typed a dot or whatever, I knew what the next thing was. And I had to because, well, we didn't have these nice pop-up tools back then. Let's take a look at a more complicated thing. This is the path. And I can see it's a string. And even though there's a lot of things that went into it, it's just words. Here I can see functions. This is defined just a couple lines above, is an array. So I can take that array and I can do a map on it. Oh, this is so much more complicated than we could do in Pascal, and I don't think I could have done this in my head, and I'm glad I have better tools now, but back in the day there were just simpler versions of this going on in my head, and it helped me. This was like the sound effects, the soundtrack while I was doing things, is just remembering what each of these pieces does. It's almost overwhelming now with all the help, but I can quickly go to the parts that I like. Wow, this is amazing. That's help that I wrote somewhere else in the program, and it knew enough about the program to find the relevant help and format it on the screen. So, again, this is a much more modern version, but imagine that this is what was going on in my head. Anytime I was doing something, I knew exactly what it was, and almost like a tour guide in my head as I'm typing. Now I go to YouTube if I need background noise. I have a list of creators with soothing voices. Back then, I didn't need it. Just these regular rules for interpreting a line of code was all it took to keep me happy. I was generating my own background noise back then. Back to high school. I was not impressed by that computer programming class. But I learned a few things from my fellow students and our constant experiments. There was a big moment of joy when we realized we could indent the phrase else if in a new and better way. And some of my friends were very excited about learning which begin statements were optional. Pascal was, quite literally, a joy to use. In college, once again, I got paid to write code. Not a huge amount of money, but some interesting projects for the school that I could see and use every day. And, again, I spent a lot of time with Pascal. We were exposed to a lot of programming languages in college, but if I wanted to write a real program, something for a real person to use, Turbo Pascal continued to provide a very powerful compiler. It made real products. What is Pascal? It was created as a teaching tool. The inventor wanted to let his students use an ideal language rather than all of the ugly but real programming languages that already existed. Then people started adding small things to the language to make it real. Small things. They kept the less is more design philosophy. It turns out that starting small and simple and adding the minimum to make something work is often a good strategy. By college, I was good at Pascal, and I was dreaming about C and C++. Now that is what really real products were made of. Pascal is for school, but I need a job, and real programmers use C and C++. That's why I was surprised that I kept running into Pascal over and over in the real world. Over and over, I got assigned to projects that were written in Pascal. And Pascal was getting better. Borland, the same company behind Turbo Pascal, was now shipping Delphi. Back in the 90s, Borland Delphi was the most powerful tool for writing PC software, and it was easy to use. It was all based on the Pascal programming language. Delphi was definitely my tool of choice for a long time. They nailed it. It was so easy to use. I could mail someone a single exe file, back when such things were legal, and that person was up and running. It was as easy to use as Microsoft Visual Basic, but as powerful as Microsoft C++. It's everything the competition claimed to be, but it actually worked. I used Delphi when I first moved to California to work on some, let's call them prototypes. The company's approved software was all written in Java. I did some cool stuff in Pascal, and I got paid for it. I learned a lot about Java, but I still preferred Delphi and Pascal. And of course, when I started Trade Ideas, I used Delphi for the first version of the server and the client. It was amazing in its time. Eventually I had to give up on Pascal. It's hard for any tool to stay relevant. I still think about Pascal a lot, all fondly. And we have some Pascal code running in the Trade Ideas server rooms. Still, there are a few old things that work so well, there was never a need to redo them in a more modern programming language. This is a good place for a stopping point. This next example is pretty deep, and I don't want to break it up, so it'll be in its own video. I asked Google how popular Delphi or Pascal was, and I got different answers, but everyone agreed that it is still around and actually getting more relevant year over year. Double arrow from both of those websites. And I don't know if anybody recognizes this. My avatar, this was part of the Delphi toolkit for building projects. This was their style, and I don't know, I guess it says 90s all over it, and I still love it. Alright, I'll talk to you soon about the rest of the Pascal stuff and a few other ideas. Thank you for joining me on this trip down memory lane.